So for your shirring sample, you need a piece of calico or light to medium weight woven fabric about 10 centimeters by 30 centimeters. And here's a little sample that I've done just to check the machine settings. This fabric here is called seersucker. You can see because it has this little ripple effect. And that's a really good fabric to shirr because it's nice and lightweight as well, and it's woven. You also need some shirring elastic, which is this stuff here. It's a real thin elastic that goes on the bobbin, an empty bobbin and a top thread. So your shirring elastic comes in either this like off-white or black, and it goes on the bottom as the bobbin thread, so you won't actually see it. So you just kind of choose the color which best matches your fabric color. So if you've got dark fabric, use black. If you've got lighter fabric, use white. Now what you need to do is wind your thread onto, or your elastic onto your bobbin. Just thread it through that little hole to hold it in place. And then you wind your bobbin by hand, keeping the elastic loose. So you don't want to stretch the elastic. So you keep going till you get an almost full bobbin. Now you won't be able to get as much elastic on a bobbin as you would thread because the elastic obviously is a lot thicker, and you're also trying to wind it so it's relatively loose. You don't want to stretch this at all. Now for the sample, I'm not going to wind the whole thing. I'm going to stop about there. I'm going to cut this end, and I'll leave the other end there. Actually, I might just pull it out and then cut that off as well. Alright, then over to your machine. There's a couple things you'll need to do to have it set up. One, you'll have it on straight stitch on the maximum length. So that's stitch 13. Now your tension here you don't usually change, but you may need to tighten that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put that on 5 instead of 4, and so I've got a slightly tighter tension. Now down here in your bobbin housing, you have a teeny tiny screw here. You may need to tighten this or loosen it. It depends. But what we need to do is pop our bobbin in with the elastic coming off to the left and pull our elastic through that little groove and out to the side. And you can see it's quite tight going in there. That's okay. We want it to be quite tight. We don't want it to be loose, because if it's too loose, our shirring won't shirr when you sew. So the elastic won't tighten as you sew. Then bring your bobbin thread up, or your elastic up through the needle plate, and pop your threads out the back. Now for the sample, we're going to use a foot's width as our guide. So to begin with, line up the edge of your fabric with the edge of the presser foot, and then you can start just like you would with a little reverse stitch, and then just let it sew. It should, if your machine settings are all good, it should just shirr it automatically. If it's not shirring, you may need to tighten that little screw on the bobbin housing. When you pull it out, make sure you pull it so that when you cut it, the elastic isn't going to go back in. So I've stretched it out and then I've let it go back, and now I'm going to cut it. So that's my first line of shirring. The first bit isn't as shirred because it's the first bit that comes out of the bobbin. Alright, and then to do the next line, you're going to line up the edge of your foot with that stitch line, do a little reverse, and then what you need to do is pull that so it's tight. keeping your edge lined up with the stitch. Little reverse, and again pull this out quite a lot and then let it go back to make sure you have enough length in the elastic, so when you cut it, it doesn't go back into the under the needle plate there. So that's the second row. I feel like the tension is a little bit tight. See, I can't fully pull that, so I'm going to put my tension back to 4 and see how that goes. Shirring does take a little bit of fiddling to get right, so you'll have to play around. You might want to do a little scrap bit first, and again you then pull it tight. You can see how it's not really coming out all the way. It's because I think that top thread tension was a little too tight. So you pull your fabric so it's nice and flat, and stitch so your foot's width from that other stitch line you've already done. Pull it out and give it a go. Okay, so I've got 3 lines so far, and that's looking pretty good. Just a little bit wary of how tight that is. I don't want my thread to snap, but to me that feels right. So for your sample, I want, you know, about 8 rows of stitching. So I won't continue because I've shown you how to do it, but I want you to complete 5 more rows from here, so you have 8 in total, all a foot's width apart.